Hey, Mac! 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 You awake? Mac!
Oh, my dear Hamburger, I'm sure you had no actual intention of turning on those lights.
Mac, did you see this box here?
Look!
Hiya. How you doing?
Pleased to meet you.
Hey, what's happening? There's always something.
Greetings, creatures from space, and welcome. I am Hamburger, and these are my friends, Fries, Cokes, Big Mac.
Everybody knows you, Hamburger. You're famous.
It talks English.
No, listen to that accent. That's Mars.
Thank you, Hamburger. I'll take it from here. Marvelous weather we've been having, don't you think?
You can't complain.
Where is your bun, sir?
Mac, is that any way to treat our visitors?
Well, we're not visitors.
You're not?
Oh, no, we're Chicken McNuggets, a favorite product at McDonald's. We're big, really big. People eat us
I
up.
can't talk to these people.
Welcome to the McDonald's family, Chicken McNuggets.
Why, thank you.
So, what are you? Wings or thighs or what?
Well, we're all made from tender pieces of white and dark chicken meat. Then we're breaded and deep fried to a golden brown. Do we look good?
Hey, they sound pretty good.
Interesting. Well, if you guys are all made the same way, how come you all look so different?
Ah, that's because we are different. We give you a choice of 4 special sauces, and each one of them makes us taste a little bit different.
Our sauces?
They got 4
I
sauces.
wonder what they could be.
It's like we go through a whole personality change. Take Bobby, for example. A regular McNugget now. But one dip in that barbecue sauce, and...
I take on some tang. Yahoo!
Hey, looks pretty good now, doesn't it?
Yeah, great idea. Barbecue sauce.
And we got the sauces that'll take you on a trip from the Wild West to the Far East. Mikado?
Thank you, McNuggets and sweet and sour sauce. Now here to please McDonald friends. There's that hand again.
It's called
Godzilla.
Hey, fantastic.
Sweet and sour sauce. All right.
Barbecue sauce? Sweet and sour sauce? What else you got, McNugget?
Well, I got a sauce here that can turn old Sam into a samurai.
Huh?
Hot mustard sauce.
Fantastic. Hot mustard.
What a great idea.
I love it.
Barbecue sauce? Sweet and sour? Hot mustard? Gee!
You said you had another one, McNugget?
That's right. Honey?
I was just a plain Jane. Until I took my first dip in a souffle cup filled with honey. Goodbye. I love y'all very much.
Wowie woo-wow.
Now there's a puppet.
Oh, yeah. Honey, that's the thing.
Amazing, McNugget. Simply amazing.
Very impressive, McNugget.
4 sauces from all over the world. Barbecue, sweet and sour, hot mustard, and honey. Chicken McNuggets, far out.
I think we got a winner here.
Funny, I've got the very same feeling.
Why, I think this is just so exciting, don't you, Hamburger?
Chicken McNuggets, on behalf of the entire staff, welcome to our family. May you soon be as famous as Big Mac himself.
What's the matter, Mac? You jealous?
My dear Fry, you are speaking to America's favorite lunch. That I should be jealous is, of course, absurd. I have no problem with Chicken McNuggets as a perfectly viable food product. They were developed by one of the finest chefs of Europe. They do have 4 exceptional sauces, and people do, in fact, seem to like them. The problem, however, with a highbrow food, such as chicken McNuggets, is they are so difficult to prepare.
Au contraire, mon père.
I beg your pardon.
Ain't necessarily so, Daddy-o. In fact, we're just about as easy to make as fries.
Is that right?
Sure.
Good. Then I presume you are prepared to train the crew in the various intricacies of your care and preparation?
Indeed I am, big guy.
Well then, might I suggest you hurry, seeing as we'll be opening our doors in less time than it takes to recite my list of ingredients?
Oh, my gosh.
We've got to get busy.
It's almost opening time.
Excuse me. Oh, watch. He does it. Will you watch out there? Look out, you're heavy, Mike. Steady.
Hey, wait a minute, everybody! Mac's right. We don't know how to cook McNuggets.
He's right.
What are we gonna do?
I don't know. It's such a fancy meal. It'll take days to learn how to make them.
Not to worry. Chicken McNuggets are easy to make. As simple as fries. And besides, I've lined up the world's greatest trainer to help us out. Coach?
Who's that? I've never before.
Look alive, shake a leg. Let's have that blackboard. Sit down, shut up, and listen up good. Coke? What's that? Gum in your mouth? 10 laps. Let's move it. Next guy talks. 50 sit-ups. Today's topic. Preparing chicken McNuggets. Any questions?
Coach?
No talking. First subject. Handling.
Please handle us with care. We come to your store frozen, and if you throw us around in our cases, we could break into pieces and or lose our precious breading.
And that would force me to get tough. Next subject. Delivery checkout.
Crew people check exterior damage to the cases before the cases are stored. Management checks inside the cases for correct temperature and weight, for excessive breakage of the pieces, for breading loss, frost, and for pieces that are stuck together, which indicates we have been thawed and refrozen.
Next, storage. We chicken McNugget types belong in the walk-in freezer with the fillet portions, away from the freezer door and away from the evaporator. We're stored in stacks no more than 5 high and on skids to allow the air to circulate beneath us, with 2 inches of airspace between the stack and the wall. The oldest delivery should be used first. Any questions?
Where do we store the sauces?
The sauces are delivered in pre-packaged sauce cups, and they're stored in the stockroom at room temperature. And that's it for storage. Next subject, setup procedures. First, turn on the chicken McNugget holding cabinet 1 hour before you're ready to use it. It needs time to heat up. Second, check the fryer temperature. It should be 360 degrees. Third, check the cooking computer to make sure the power's turned on. It will make automatic computerized timing adjustments for different sized McNugget loads. It has an automatic duty timer that tells you when to shake the basket. And it is also the signal to drop the next basket when you are in the drop-pull mode of production. How about that, huh? If they make it any easier, you guys are gonna really get flabby. Okay, total cooking time, about 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hamburger, how long does it take to cook chicken McNuggets?
4 minutes, 15 seconds, sir.
Right. Now, the duty timer is going to go off in the middle of the cooking time to remind you to shake that basket so we won't go sticking together. Now, that's going to sound at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Fries, what's the setting for the duty timer?
2 minutes to 20 seconds, sir.
Way to go! All right. Who said that fries were stupid? Next, load the portable freezer with bags of chicken McNuggets, making sure you got enough for the rush hour. But be sure not to overstock. This freezer is located right next to the fry station. Next, stock the sauces.
Take the sauces to the front counter and store them in the McNugget sauce holder. There are 5 bins in the holder, and the extra bin is for storing additional supplies of your store's most asked-for sauce.
And that's it for the setup procedures. Yeah, that boy, Coke. Go get yourself some ice.
Oh, boy.
Next subject, cooking procedures. So simple, even a hamburger could do it.
I resent that.
You resent that? I resent that. You're gonna give me 20. But after I tell you how to cook us McNuggets. Now, you can't miss out on this. It's too important. First step,
Load the basket away from the vat, dropping in the amount of McNuggets you want, and making sure that none of us are stuck together. Now, if we are, separate us, or we will cook improperly. Chicken McNuggets are cooked frozen and should not be allowed to thaw.
now, you can cook a partial bag, or a half bag, or a full bag. The production caller will tell you how many, depending on the hour. Each fry basket can cook a maximum of 1 bag.
Second step, start cooking. Lower the basket into the fryer. Activate the computer. Then, after 2 minutes and 20 seconds, you'll hear this sound. Does that mean the game is over? No. That's your duty timer telling you it's time to shake basket at duty cycle. Gently. Just enough to loosen any of us who might have stuck together. Less than 2 minutes later, the computer will sound. And that means, fries?
It means fries?
When the computer sounds after the total cooking time of 4 minutes and 15 seconds, it means what?
Oh, means the McNuggets are done.
Some days I should never get out of the freezer. When the computer sounds, the McNuggets are done and it is time to
Drain the McNuggets! Turn off the computer. Lift the basket and shake it lightly to separate the pieces. Let them drain for 5 to 10 seconds and dump us tasty McNuggets into the McNugget transfer basket. Lift the basket by the handles and put us in the holding cabinet. And be careful to make sure we're spread evenly, so we'll stay hot and fresh and tasty and delicious for 30 minutes. And not a second longer, because that's our maximum serving time. 30 minutes. Now, the first thing you do once we're in the holding cabinet is activate the holding timer, and the countdown begins. If any of us are left after 30 minutes, it's bye-bye birdie. Discard any leftovers. Got it?
Coach?
Hamburger, have you ever heard of raising your hand?
I don't have a hand, sir.
Oh, well, then will somebody please give Burger a hand over there? Now cut that out! What is it, Burger?
Well, I noticed the holding cabinet has 3 drawers, sir, and
Very good. Very observant, Burger. Nice going. Head away. 3 drawers. That's right. How about a big hand for the Burger? 3 drawers. You start with the top drawer. Once you've started the timer on that drawer, you go to the middle drawer, and then the bottom. Keep rotating from top to bottom. Each drawer will hold 1 full bag of us McNuggets, and each drawer has its own timer. Next step, package the orders. Packaging is done as the orders are called for. Take the pieces out of the holding cabinet, again rotating the drawers from top to bottom, and use the McNugget scoop to put us into the box. Regular orders have 6 pieces. How many pieces per order, big team?
6 pieces per order.
Good! But we also have 9-piece and 20-piece orders. The production caller will tell you how many you need. Got it? Now, if you notice any irregularities when you're packaging, you should notify your manager right away. Okay? Okay. Once the order is packaged, pass it on to the production caller. From there,
we're placed in the transfer bin with a maximum holding time of 10 minutes. But remember, Chicken McNuggets have a maximum serving time of 30 minutes, and that includes time in the bin. So if we've been in the cabinet for 25 minutes, we've got 5 minutes left. Period. Okay? Fries, you confused? Okay, one more time for Fries' sake. Once we go into the holding cabinet and the timer is activated, we've got 30 minutes. After that, we're leftovers. Once we're out of the holding cabinet, we've 10 minutes. But if we've been cooped up in the cabinet for 26 minutes, we've only got 4 minutes left in the transfer bin. Okay? Now, believe it or not,
that's all there is to cooking Chicken McNuggets. You see how simple, Fries? Hey, Fries, when you gonna get that haircut, huh? All right, big team, all together. What are the cooking procedures for Chicken McNuggets? Load the basket with the proper amount of Chicken McNuggets. Lower the basket into the fryer and activate the cooking computer. Put the McNuggets in the holding cabinet and activate the holding Hey, come on, would you? Apply yourselves already. Hey, Matt, come on over here and I'll tell you all about closing procedures. Well, closing is pretty simple, really. Turn off the fire and store any remaining McNuggets in the walk-in freezer. Hey, and don't forget to turn off the holding cabinet. And open the drawers partway so they can cool down. And discard any leftovers. Hey, move it, pipsqueak. Hey, you know what? I bet you we can do it on the first try. Oh, sure. No problem. It's all up to the crew. To prepare them right, and then suggestions of the
customer. That's the key. Just say, welcome to McDonald's. Have you tried Chicken McNuggets? Describe it, answer any questions, and you'll be a smashing success. Mac, I'm surprised at you.
Oh, well, after all, McNuggets, that's the way I got my start. Way to go, Big Mac.
This episode of Yesterworld is sponsored by Audible. Go to audible.com/yesterworld or text Yesterworld to 500-500 to sign up for a free 30-day trial to support the channel. You'll also get a free Audible title, which I'll reveal in this episode's intermission, because boy is this a long one and you'll need a break. When it comes to movies with infamous production problems, there's quite a few with inspiring success stories. From Star Wars: A New Hope, Jaws, The Wizard of Oz, Blade Runner to The Shining, they all became iconic cinematic masterpieces despite their troubles getting made. George Lucas's Howard the Duck, however, is not one of them, as the only thing worse than the movie's disastrous production were the scathing reviews and abysmal ticket sales. The movie is a true enigma, and on more than one occasion instills discomfort in viewers with the white-hot intensity of 1,000 suns. But the origins of Howard the Duck and his journey to the big screen is filled to the brim with just as much, if not more, chaos and absurdity than the film itself. So strap yourself in for a deep dive into one of the most bizarre movies ever made, with the disastrous history of Howard the Duck. The story of Howard the Duck goes all the way back to 1970, with Marvel's horror comic book series, Fear. Fear was initially written by the legendary Stan Lee, and as you can probably guess, featured horror stories, many of which involving specific monsters. However, while most of the comic was original, the monster stories were not, as they were actually reprints of previous comics from the 50s and 60s. But that all changed in 1973 with issue number 10, as Fear was given the new title of Adventure into Fear, with the introduction of an original monster story, Man-Thing. The new creature also came with a new writer to the series by the name of Steve Gerber, who had a special knack for the absurd. With Steve Gerber at the helm, Adventure into Fear with Man-Thing pressed on for quite some time, but most important to our story was issue number 19, The Land Between Night and Day. In this particular issue, and I swear this all connects to Howard the Duck, he introduced a plot device involving a jar of peanut butter that transformed into an ancient barbarian warrior. You see, it turned out that Man-Thing's swamp was the nexus point of cosmic forces, which was now being disturbed. If left unchecked, much like Peanut Butter Man, even more bizarre creations could emerge. Well, later in the comic, that's precisely what happens, and we're introduced to a wisecracking duck smoking a cigar, wearing the top half of a suit with a tiny hat, and no pants. In fact, according to artist Val Nyerick, who drew the original Duck, the most important part of his visual incarnation was to not look too much like Donald Duck. His appearance is brief, and he isn't even given a name, as the comic ends on a cliffhanger a few pages later. Now, the unnamed Duck story was supposed to continue in the next issue, but instead, Marvel began a new story with a new monster, Morbius, who would ironically one day star in Marvel's second worst movie ever made. As far as what happened to Man-Thing, it turned out Steve Gerber was given his very own comic book series to continue the story, and the wisecracking duck was intended to be a recurring character. However, Marvel's then editor-in-chief Roy Thomas had a few reservations about the mallard, as he felt a humorous duck wasn't a good fit with the more serious, horror-centric nature of the comic series. Because, you know, a barbarian warrior magically manifesting from a jar of peanut butter wasn't silly at all. So Steve Gerber was told to get rid of the duck ASAP, and when the Man-Thing standalone series debuted a few months later, he did just that. And by that, I mean he's officially introduced as Howard, heroically battles the bad guys, but then 6 pages later is traveling across magic stepping stones when he clumsily trips and falls into oblivion, never to be seen again. At least that was supposed to be his fate, but evidently Marvel's mailroom was bombarded with letters from angry fans who demanded Howard the Duck to be brought back. One especially disturbed fan even sent Marvel the bones of a dead duck in protest, and Marvel executives like Stan Lee were hounded on a regular basis. So Howard the Duck was indeed resurrected, and the next year made his grand reappearance in the Man-Thing spin-off series, Giant-Size Man-Thing. Howard the Duck's story picks up as he's tumbling through an unworldly void of time and space, where days turn into weeks and weeks into months. Finally, he lands in the state of Cleveland, and his tale of adjusting to the world of humans continues from there. Though he was just a side story within the Man-Thing spin-off comic, the edgy duck was a hit, and left fans desperately wanting more. So the next year in 1976, he was given his very own comic book series, Howard the Duck.
Someone was mentioning about, you mentioned I think earlier about Howard the Duck.
Howard the Duck.
No.
This comic book right here, it's still very hard to find. We sold out yesterday, we had 35 copies and we sold out.
So there is a phenomenon for Howard the Duck.
You can't keep it in stock at any price.
Over the course of 31 issues spanning 3 years, Howard faced all kinds of villains and monsters, and his off-brand sense of wit and snarkiness were by and large the primary draw. Ultimately, he was a good guy, but was also incredibly obnoxious and rude. so basically the true definition of an anti-hero. The series also contained loads of social and political commentary, satire, parody, existentialism, and a truly awkward, albeit primarily hinted at romance between Howard and a woman named Beverly Switzler. But just as Howard the Duck's popularity was rising with comic book fans, in the late 1970s, a director by the name of George Lucas was finishing up a little film called Star Wars. And as strange as it seems, he would prove vital in not only bringing Howard the Duck to life on the big screen, but creating Marvel's first ever theatrical film.
George Lucas, the director of American Graffiti and Star Wars, is a longtime dedicated fan of the comics.
The comic books and comic art is a really strong and very close to the pulse of the culture kind of art. And in that way, I don't think it'll ever die out. I don't think it'll, I think what is drawn today will become very important. It's the hieroglyphs of the graffiti of our times.
Now, to properly tell the story of George Lucas and Howard the Duck, we have to backtrack to his first commercial movie, American Graffiti, which he was directing for Universal Pictures. But not so much the making of the movie itself, but his trips to Universal's executive offices in New York City. You see, Lucas had been a fan of comic books and comic book artwork all of his life, especially the Flash Gordon series by cartoonist Alex Raymond. So it's no surprise that on one of his trips to New York, he wound up visiting a nearby comic book shop. The store was Super Snipe Comic Book Euphorium, and George Lucas wound up becoming fast friends with the shop's owner and fellow filmmaker, Edward Summers. The two bonded over their passion for comics, filmmaking, and especially the writings and artwork of Flash Gordon, which would ultimately play a significant part of developing his next project, Star Wars. But the friendship soon evolved into a partnership, as when American Graffiti became a massive hit, Lucas used his earnings to become co-owner of the comic shop's art gallery. Though he was more of a silent partner, his ownership played a vital role in a certain, let's say, duckscovery a few years later. Okay, I swear that's the only duck pun I'll make in this video. Flash forward to July of 1976, just after filming wrapped for Star Wars at Elstree Studios in London. You see, as George Lucas made his way back to California, he spent some time in New York, and while he was there, paid a visit to his comic book shop. As fate would have it, this is also when a certain new comic series was flying off the shelves, Howard the Duck. At some point, he grabbed a copy for himself, and was instantly drawn to the comic's blend of science fiction with absurdist humor, as well as its clever social commentary and hints of film noir. He also felt the comic had potential as a feature film, and would serve as quite the creative challenge to bring to life on the big screen. But George Lucas had no desire to direct or write the film himself, especially since he was knee-deep in wrapping up Star Wars. Instead, he envisioned Howard the Duck as a project for his good friends Gloria Katz and her husband Willard Huyck. Lucas had originally met the couple during his time at USC, and the trio became fast friends. A few years later, he also chose them to write the screenplay for American Graffiti, to which they received critical acclaim. The couple had even lent a hand with writing Star Wars, specifically character dialogue. Though officially without credit, their contributions to A New Hope led to some of the film's most clever and witty banter. In fact, by their account, they supplied somewhere around 30% of dialogue for the entire film.
Too short for a stormtrooper?
Huh? You think a princess and a guy like me?
No.
But as far as how the writers were plagued with, given the idea to make Howard the Duck, it happened on a lunch date between the old friends. You see, one day while taking a break from the grueling post-production of Star Wars, George Lucas, Gloria Katz, and Willard Huyck were workshopping another in-development script, Radioland Murders. At some point on that fateful afternoon, Lucas told them all about Howard the Duck, and according to Gloria Katz, had even brought back the first issue from his comic book shop to show them. Going further, he expressed how he felt the humor of the comics shared their same comedic sensibilities, and both Huyck and Katz were immediately interested. But the notion of George Lucas producing the film with them as the writers was about as far as the conversation went, as any further discussions beyond that would have to wait until after the release of Star Wars. After all, if his risky and expensive sci-fi epic was a dud, it was basically game over for him in the film industry. This may seem absurd today, but back then it was a real possibility, as the film's bizarre story and characters, countless production troubles, overly ambitious special effects, and ever-increasing budget led many to believe it would be a flop. So the future of Howard the Duck quite literally hinged on whether Star Wars wound up being a financial disaster or box office hit. But luckily for them, or in a way unlucky, it was the latter.
The people in this crowd will soon be among almost 40,000 who have seen a new science fiction movie at North Park Cinema 2. The movie is called Star Wars, and since it opened here 9 days ago, capacity crowds have filled the 1,100 seats in the theater almost daily. Although lines at North Park Cinema stretched to more than a half-mile long and the movie cost $3.75 a person, no one tonight seemed to mind the crowds.
When Star Wars hit theaters in May of 1977, it wasn't just a box office hit, it changed the film industry and pop culture forever. On top of that, much like the movie Jaws did for its director Steven Spielberg, it also thrust George Lucas into stardom. And then some. So it should come as no surprise that in the midst of Star Wars mania, the question soon arose of what the filmmaker would be doing next. Now at first, George Lucas wasn't sure he even wanted to do another Star Wars. At least not yet. He did have a rough story outline for the sequel ready to go, but 2 other films were also on the table. A movie about the Lost Ark of the Covenant with Steven Spielberg, and Howard the Duck with Gloria Katz and Willard Huyck. Now this Lost Ark idea was still in its infancy, and although it did have inspirations from 1930s and 40s action B-movies, it was an original story requiring no licensing. Howard the Duck, on the other hand, was of course the property of Marvel Comics, so before even possibly moving forward, they would have to inquire about the rights. Some sources claim Lucas himself reached out to Marvel, but others say it was Katz and Huyck. In fact, quick tangent, this story contains more conflicting statements and contradictory information than anything I've ever done before, and the amount of research required given the I was able to verify most of the information with concurring statements from a wide variety of sources, but sometimes like this it's more he said, she said. Anyway, regardless of who reached out to Marvel for the rights of Howard the Duck, the answer was the same. No. But the reason wasn't for lack of interest, it's that they'd recently licensed Howard the Duck to someone else, the head of Universal Pictures Television, Frank Price. Now, for those unaware, Frank Price was behind a slew of incredibly popular and successful Universal shows most of you under the age of 25 have probably never heard of. The specifics of his deal with Marvel was to license a dozen characters for a number of in-the-works Marvel TV shows and Marvel TV movies. The characters to be licensed included Thor, The Incredible Hulk, Miss Marvel, Power Man, Doctor Strange, Iron Fist, the Submariner, Captain America, the Human Torch, and Howard the Duck. Now by 1977, when George Lucas and/or the writers inquired to Marvel about the rights to Howard the Duck, the only shows actually in production was The Incredible Hulk starring Lou Ferrigno. When, or if they would ever get around to Howard the Duck, or the others for that matter, remained to be seen. Although within a couple of years, Universal would have a Captain America TV movie and a pilot featuring Doctor Strange.
Have I become the sorcerer?
You should learn whose powers to respect.
Come along for a fantastic adventure into the 4th dimension with Doctor Strange.
With the rights to Howard the Duck tied up with Universal, George Lucas turned his gaze back to the Lost Ark project, and to the relief of Star Wars fans, a sequel to the science fiction masterpiece. Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz would also turn to other projects, which meant for almost a decade a movie version of Howard the Duck was off the table. Kind of. You see, this is when the story takes a very bizarre turn, as there was another doomed Howard the Duck movie that has more or less been lost to time. It is a bit of a detour away from George Lucas's Howard the Duck, but it's an important part of the character's disastrous journey to the big screen. It begins at the height of Howard the Duck's popularity in March of 1978, when the character's creator Steve Gerber was suddenly fired from Marvel. The reason for his termination was chronic lateness with his scripts, as he often missed important deadlines and publications for the series. So the Howard the Duck comics went on for 2 more issues without Gerber, and there was even a magazine series, but the publications were poorly received and soon came to an end. Although the magazine did feature the first explicit bedroom scene between Howard the Duck and his human love interest Beverly, so there is that. Anyway, 2 years after his dismissal in 1980, Steve Gerber got word that Marvel was creating a Howard the Duck animated TV show. Not only that, but Marvel was also negotiating with a movie studio to make a Howard the Duck feature film, neither of which had Steve Gerber's approval or even so much as the creator's blessing. Now you might be thinking, wait, didn't Universal own the rights? Isn't that why George Lucas and/or the writers couldn't license Howard the Duck? Did spending months knee-deep in Howard the Duck history cause Mark to lose his mind and contradict himself? Well, yes and no. You see, remember Frank Price, the executive who had bought the Marvel character rights for Universal? Well, in 1978, he wound up resigning from Universal to become the president of Columbia Pictures, and this led to the rights for Howard the Duck to go back to Marvel. Although some sources say he took the rights with him and let them expire, or even sold them back to Marvel. But regardless of how the rights reverted back, when Steve Gerber heard about these new Howard the Duck projects without his involvement, he immediately reached out to Marvel. Claiming ownership of Howard the Duck, he offered to license the property to Marvel, but they, quote, refused to negotiate or agree to anything. Basically, their stance was, we can do whatever the f we want because we own Howard the Duck, not you. So he hired a lawyer and sent Marvel a cease and desist letter, demanding them to go no further with the in-development movie or TV show. But despite his legal threats, and as spearheaded by Stan Lee, Marvel went forward anyway, and officially made a deal with a company called Celluloid Productions, Inc. Specifically, it was the rights for a Howard the Duck radio show starring Jim Belushi, and a one-year licensing option for the feature film. Signed on to direct and write the movie were filmmakers Dennis Hacken and Neil Dabrowski, who'd recently produced and wrote the movie Bronco Billy for Clint Eastwood. The yet-to-be-named Howard the Duck movie was also given a budget of $8 million, or close to $30 million today. But to bring Howard the Duck to life on the big screen was going to be no easy task, so they reached out to then mostly unknown, but now legendary special effects genius Stan Winston, who, quick fun fact, had recently done the Wookiee costumes for the infamous Star Wars holiday special. However, unlike the unintentionally terrifying Lumpy the Wookiee, for Howard the Duck he would utilize a combination of suit and puppetry, much like Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back. The intention was to stay faithful to Steve Gerber's design of the iconic duck, but also adapt Howard's look to better fit a live-action world. In the words of Stan Winston, he would use the best techniques the industry had to offer to create the, quote, ultimate Muppet. Now obviously this version of the film never became a reality, nor did the animated series. So, what happened? Well, after learning Marvel went forward with the movie deal, even after a cease and desist letter, Steve Gerber sued Marvel over the ownership of Howard the Duck. The case itself is incredibly fascinating, but way too much to get into here, so check out the description for links to the court documents if you want to give them a read yourself. But to summarize the case, Steve Gerber did have a strong argument, at least in regards to being the character's creator, which remember, he did while he was freelancing for Marvel. The problem was that once he became an official employee of Marvel, he signed away all the ownership and copyrights of Howard the Duck. There were stipulations in his contract that would have given him creative control for a Howard the Duck feature film or TV show, but once he was fired, this was made null and void. So the moral of the story is, always read the fine print. Marvel did eventually offer Steve Gerber at least some sort of compensation to drop the case, which he accepted, though specifics were never revealed. As far as Howard the Duck the movie, those involved assured fans it wasn't cancelled, and was actually going full speed ahead with a new writer by the name of Edwin Heaven. But then, that's it. That's the last official statement regarding this version of the movie, as allegedly it wound up losing funding due to all the negative press of the lawsuit, and possibly the undisclosed settlement terms. So the rights to Howard the Duck once again reverted back to Marvel, who at this point had also abandoned the animated series mentioned earlier. However, as fate would have it, and not necessarily good fate, another attempt at bringing Howard the Duck to life on the big screen was just around the corner. But before we continue the episode and get to the really juicy stuff, we're gonna take a quick 90-second break. In that time, you could grab a snack, feed your fish, pet your doggo, or sign up for a free 30-day trial of Audible to support the channel at audible.com/yesterworld. Let's not kid ourselves, you'd have to have been living under a rock to not know anything about Audible. But maybe you're stubborn like me and thought for the longest time, I'll never forgo my precious physical copies of books. But trust me when I say it's not a replacement of your beloved hard copies, but a way to enjoy more of your favorite titles anywhere, anytime. For example, I listen to Audible when putting together my LEGO display sets. In fact, I listened to Matthew Perry's The Big Terrible Thing when building the LEGO Ideas Lighthouse, and Tom Felton's Beyond the Wand this month when I put together my Home Alone house, removing the stigma of LEGO is just for kids one set at a time. Speaking of which, you can get Tom Felton's Beyond the Wand for yourself by using my URL, and that's on top of the 30-day trial. As an Audible member, you get one free title each month, with access to all the latest releases, bestsellers, podcasts, and Audible originals. So whether you sign up during this break or after the episode, go to audible.com/yesterworld, or text yesterworld to 500-500 to begin your free 30-day trial today. And with that, we continue the story of Howard the Duck, which picks up with the release of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom premieres in less than 2 weeks. We're starting our show with a treat, an exclusive behind-the-scenes look, courtesy of the producers, at Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford at work with a cast of thousands.
Despite the troubles of getting Howard the Duck off the ground, George Lucas, Willard Huyck, and Gloria Katz teamed up for the sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. But aside from being the movie that brought the trio back together, Temple of Doom was also the final film Lucas planned to be intricately involved in for quite some time, as during its production he announced a sabbatical from making movies. You see, on top of the 2 Indiana Jones films, he'd also just wrapped up Return of the Jedi, the final installments of his original Star Wars trilogy. But the non-stop work on a sci-fi franchise had taken a toll on his personal life, and George Lucas's workaholic nature in part led to his wife Marsha Lucas asking for a divorce. In his words, he was burned out from Star Wars and had been for years, and desperately needed time to focus on getting his life back. So his plan was to instead focus on raising his daughter, building his film facility Skywalker Ranch, and most important to our story, producing movies for other filmmakers. Oh yeah, and playing himself in truly bizarre Japanese Panasonic camera commercials, which are about as awkward as you might expect. My personal favorite is the one where he's pondering in a field, awkwardly doing whatever that is and smiling at the camera, then going hand in hand with two Ewoks to meet up with all the other Star Wars characters.
Panasonic, always new dreams, wonderful friends.
Panasonic, いつも新しい夢.
Anyway, put simply, George Lucas wanted to find stories he could assist in getting made, but take more of a backseat to the day-to-day work of actual production. And lucky for him, or unlucky, such a project would soon come his way. You see, after writing Temple of Doom, Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz decided to inquire once again about the rights to Howard the Duck. Lucky for them, or ultimately unlucky, this time they were available. Marvel even allowed them to option the film for free, which basically means they were allowed to write the script and pitch it to movie studios before paying a dime. So over the course of the next few months, they wrote several versions of the script, and it was around this time that George Lucas officially came aboard. According to Gloria Katz, they were struggling with the logistics of developing Howard the Duck as a feature film, so they reached out to Lucas due to his past interest in the project. Now at this point in George Lucas's quasi-retirement, he was producing a number of Star Wars TV shows, albeit with very little involvement. Outside of this, he'd also been quietly producing a number of feature films without credit, mostly to help out his filmmaking buddies. The most famous example was Disney's Return to Oz, as when his directing friend Walter Murch was fired for going over schedule, he got him his job back and saved the production from getting shut down. Although, given just how unintentionally terrifying the film turned out, this more than likely would have saved a lot of kids from future therapy costs. Another example was George Lucas serving as a so-called silent producer for Lawrence Kasdan's directorial debut, who was the writer of Raiders of the Lost Ark and the last two Star Wars films. To help his friend get his film made, he was even the film's financial guarantor, which meant if the movie went over budget, he'd personally cover the cost. But, and this is a big but, for everything that wasn't Star Wars, George Lucas's name was virtually absent from marketing, which was done to avoid false expectations of the projects. So when Huyck and Katz went to Lucas with Howard the Duck, he agreed to be the film's executive producer, but with a sort of asterisk. You see, much like the previous examples, he was initially going to be more of a silent partner to simply assist in the film getting made, both as a favor to his friends and because of his interest in the source material. Unfortunately, that's not how Hollywood saw it, especially as the film was being pitched studio to studio. They saw it as the next big-budget science fiction film from the creator of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, along with the writers of the incredibly successful American Graffiti and Temple of Doom to boot. So it soon became the talk of the town. But of all the movie studios they pitched to, Universal showed by far the most interest. And for good reason. Long story short, in 1972, George Lucas had signed a two-picture deal with Universal to produce two live-action films. The first was American Graffiti, which of course went on to become a huge success. The second was supposed to be Star Wars, but due to its high budget, ahead of its time special effects, and bizarre sci-fi story, they passed. After Star Wars released and, became a pop culture phenomenon, executives at Universal realized they'd shot themselves in the foot. So now, almost a decade later, in fact, one source claims that two of Universal's most powerful executives lobbied very hard to get Howard the Duck, President Lew Wasserman and COO Sid Sheinberg. Also, contrary to popular belief, George Lucas doing Howard the Duck for Universal had nothing to do with the two-picture deal he signed in the 70s. In reality, he fulfilled that contract in 1979 by producing more American Graffiti, which was Universal's way to capitalize on the success of Star Wars, and featured a rather unenthusiastic cameo from Harrison Ford.
Make it easy for you, lady. It's 54362. Name is Falfa. Officer Falfa. F-A-L-F-A.
You see, a few years after leaving Universal for Columbia Pictures, he actually wound up coming back to Universal. According to one of the filmmakers, he also hadn't lost interest in making Howard the Duck into a movie, and jumped at the chance to do it with George Lucas attached. However, one of Frank Price's stipulations before moving forward was that Howard the Duck had to be a live-action film. This was the first let's say, creative compromise for the writing partners, as to properly capture Steve Gerber's world and characters, they envisioned Howard the Duck as an animated film. But this would have required far more cash and resources than Universal was willing to invest, and they also wanted to release Howard the Duck by the next summer. An alternative idea was to create a CGI Howard within a live-action world, sort of like what Disney was experimenting with around the same time for the original abandoned version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Unfortunately, the initial tests of a CGI Howard came out so bad that the artists and designers were fired. So at the insistence of George Lucas, the decision was made to instead do the film with puppets and have the special effects done by ILM. Now the time frame of the script's development is a little iffy, as is George Lucas's true involvement, which we'll get to a bit later. But as far as I can tell, the original version of the screenplay was submitted to Universal in early 1985, with the hopes of beginning production ASAP. Specifics of this version are vague, but the writers claim it was a much smaller and more realistic story, with Howard already on Earth as a detective, and was heavily inspired by the film noir genre. In fact, initially Duck World wasn't to be shown at all, or used as a plot device, especially since it only appeared in the poorly received comics after Steve Gerber left Marvel. One actor compared the original script to the best-selling novel Stranger in a Strange Land, with a more serious undertone and character-driven story. Of course, whether or not this more grounded version of Howard the Duck would have jump-started Marvel's cinematic universe 20 years earlier is pure speculation. But as far as why it was never even given a chance, the blame partially lies on...
Columbia Pictures has spared no expense to make this a fine science fiction comedy spectacle.
What a bunch of good sports they are.
And it is PG. I'm f***ing telling you, it's PG!
You see, a few years earlier, a little movie by the name of Ghostbusters was greenlit for Columbia Pictures, and the person responsible for this was, take a guess, Frank Price. It was the first big-budget special effects-driven action comedy of its kind, far from a guaranteed success given its uncharted cinematic territory. It was also given just over 8 months to go from a finalized script to the big screen, which, considering the movie's complicated special effects, was very, very little time. But boy did they pull it off, as the film was not only a critical success, but also wound up earning nearly $300 million worldwide, around 10 times its $30 million budget. So when Frank Price resigned from Columbia Pictures to go back to Universal and landed Howard the Duck, he requested quite a few Ghostbusters-like changes to be made to the script. And by request, I mean demand in order for the movie to be made. First and foremost, Howard the Duck was to be more of a special effects-driven action-adventure blockbuster, less character-driven and more of an event film. There were also to be a couple nerdy scientists, interdimensional portals, a good character who's taken over by an evil entity, and a special effects creature-driven climax.
It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
So Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz set about rewriting the script, and at this point it seems Howard the Duck's creator Steve Gerber was brought in as a consultant of sorts. Although, for the record, it does seem like he met up with the filmmakers before this point, but since his interviews specifically reference elements of the rewritten script, it appears this is when he got more involved. Now, Steve Gerber always went back and forth on his actual contributions to the screenplay, but at the very least he did offer input on what the characters would or wouldn't do. He was also, in his own words, highly impressed and borderline ecstatic with how the script turned out, praising the writer's treatment of the character. But in the midst of finalizing the shooting script, another problem rose to the surface. Disney's Donald Duck. This was an issue that went all the way back to Howard the Duck's debut in the 70s, as Disney noticed the obvious similarities between the two ducks, and contacted Marvel. The two companies were able to come to an agreement, and Howard was to undergo minor cosmetic alterations to appease Disney, most notably the inclusion of pants. But supposedly there was a massive oversight within Marvel's legal team, because Howard the Duck remained as is. That is, aside from a single issue where Steve Gerber did apply the wardrobe changes, only to end the comic with Howard throwing away his clothes in protest. Eventually, however, Disney noticed the changes weren't being followed, and actually threatened to sue. So a new agreement was reached, and these appearance alterations were finally implemented in the short-lived magazine series a couple years later. When it came to Howard the Duck the movie, it involved serious legal meetings and multiple redesigns to appease Disney once again. The end result was a sort of Frankenstein hybrid of Howard the Duck, Donald Duck, and the Stuff of Nightmares. But speaking of appeasing a major studio, Universal finally approved Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz's new script in May of 1985, and the movie was officially given a go. With a catch.
It's a trap!
Evidently, one of the final stipulations from Universal and Frank Price was to heavily market Howard the Duck as George Lucas's next major film post-Star Wars. Initially, though, he was incredibly reluctant to agree, as he knew having his name attached would set up certain expectations to the public, As mentioned earlier, this is the reason he kept his name off the promotion of movies he produced outside of Star Wars. But from a desire to help out his longtime friends, and since he, gave them the idea in the first place, he agreed to sponsor the film even beyond the duties of executive producer. So in August of 1985, Howard the Duck was officially announced as an upcoming movie from Universal Pictures and Lucasfilm. Going further, it was often marketed as George Lucas's new movie, and, quote, the Duck version of Indiana Jones. Signed on to direct was Willard Huyck, with Gloria Katz producing alongside George Lucas. Much like Ghostbusters, it was also given a budget of $30 million, or roughly $80 million today. Also like Ghostbusters, the filmmakers were given just 8 months to go from the beginning of filming to its scheduled release. This forced almost every aspect of Howard the Duck's production to be rushed, but unlike Ghostbusters, it was to feature a complex animatronic puppet as its lead actor. Speaking of which, with less than 2 months before filming was to begin, Howard himself wasn't even finished. You see, much like the previously mentioned abandoned version of Howard the Duck, this one was also inspired by the puppeteering feat of Yoda in Star Wars, as they felt this was the best way to bring the talking duck to life on the big screen. For wide shots, however, they'd utilize a body double, which much like Hoggle and Jim Henson's Labyrinth, would also use animatronics in the face to speak and convey emotion. The artist building both versions of Howard the Duck was Elaine Baker, the ex-wife of legendary Hollywood creature designer Rick Baker. But after 7 months of work, the duck was having major complications, and at this point filming was just over a month away. So George Lucas reached out to a past Star Wars crew member who had a lot of experience in this field, a puppeteer by the name of Tim Rose.
To achieve the desired credibility, there were 2 versions of Akbar. One for wide shots, and this one for close-ups. Here, puppeteer Tim Rose, who plays Admiral Akbar in the movie, works painstakingly to put mouth and words into perfect synchronization.
Tim Rose was the puppeteer and voice for the Return of the Jedi's Admiral Akbar, and also brought to life creatures like Salacious B. Crumb and the original pre-CGI sized Noodles. So when George Lucas gave Tim Rose a call and asked him for his help, Tim Rose then reached out to a designer named Tad Schnotsky, the guy who actually did the animatronics and controls for Labyrinth's Hoggle. The two agreed to come aboard Howard the Duck, flew out to California with just 3 weeks until filming was to begin, and immediately got to work. Now, the most advanced mechanics for facial expressions were designated for the Howard puppets, as remember, these were intended for close-ups and medium shots. Quite a bit of work also went towards the animatronic faces on the duck suits, but since they were supposed to be for wide shots and required space for the actor's head, their capabilities were far more limited. As far as who was hired to actually wear the suits, at just under 3 foot tall was a 12-year-old actor by the name of Jordan Prentice, who was chosen to be the primary Howard. Ed Gale was another actor chosen for the part, but since he was slightly taller at 3'4", he was to do Howard's stunt work. Speaking of actors, for the role of Howard's love interest Beverly was Leah Thompson, who had just come off the massively successful Back to the Future. To play the goofy aspirational scientist who tries to get Howard back to Duck World was Tim Robbins, who at the time of casting was virtually unknown. For the other scientist who also transforms into the movie's villain was actor Jeffrey Jones, but due to his disgusting crimes later in real life, we'll avoid talking about him as much as possible. Anyway, with all the production troubles behind them, or so they thought, Howard the Duck officially began filming in November of 1985, with barely over 7 months until its release.
Who has feathers, smokes a cigar, and carries the fate of the world on his shoulders? His name is Howard the Duck, and he's the lead in the new movie produced by Star Wars creator George Lucas and directed by Willard Huyck.
Now, the actual filming and production of Howard the Duck was pretty straightforward and smooth. I'm kidding, it was a disaster. Again, just to re-emphasize, the articulated puppets were planned to be used for the vast majority of the movie. The duck suits, which at this point had very limited facial expressions and movement, were intended only for wide shots. However, on the first day of shooting, just as Howard opened his mouth to speak, the puppet's skin literally split open on the first take, and was, quote, a disaster. In fact, according to Gloria Katz, in the weeks leading up to filming, they kept having to rebuild the ducks after routinely exploding, so this wasn't the first instance by far. When editing the film, they also had issues with the puppets matching the humans in the duck suits, and getting the puppets across the room in a single take was, in her words, a nightmare. So while the duck puppets did eventually improve and were used in quite a few close-ups and stunt work, they were utilized far less than originally planned. Instead, the vast majority of Howard the Duck's appearance in the movie would consist of the body doubles in the suits, Jordan Prentice and Ed Gale. But since these weren't intended for close-ups, they had to scramble to give these versions of Howard's face more complex and realistic movement. So as improvements were made to Howard's appearance, they'd reshoot the character's scene. And with each additional improvement, they'd reshoot again. And again, and again. But the problems of Howard's physical form only seemed to get worse, as there were growing concerns with Jordan Prentice, the 12-year-old inside the suit. For one, like many kids, he often had to go to the bathroom, so after an hour plus of getting him in the suit, sometimes they'd immediately have to get him back out, then spend another hour getting him back in. Child labor laws also meant he could only work very strict hours, so production was constantly going over schedule. He also experienced quite a bit of claustrophobia in the suit, with painful burns from all the mechanics in the face. To top it all off, the film's editor was having a tough time matching the more childish movements of Jordan Prentice with the more mature movements of the other costume duck actor, Ed Gale. If that wasn't bad enough, there was also an issue of child endangerment. One of the incidents occurred when shooting the film's climax, as the young actor's duck costume caught fire from a nearby explosion.
My biggest challenge in playing this role was surviving it.
So ultimately, they decided to use Ed Gale for both stunt work and the primary Howard the Duck. However, to make all the scenes match, they once again had to reshoot quite a bit of the movie, which pushed the film over budget and even further behind schedule. This led to various members of the crew to be fired for no particular reason, just because, well, that's Hollywood, I guess, and someone has to be blamed. When it came to who was to voice Howard the Duck, that was another fiasco.
God, I tried the voice for them. They wanted different voices. When I talked to George Lucas, who was a friend, he wanted me to try it, just to give them an idea about different voices. I tried different voices. I tried real tough duck. They want a sensitive, kind of 1980s yuppie duck.
You see, the prospect of doing the voice for a George Lucas production was incredibly alluring, so a ton of well-known actors and TV personalities auditioned for the part. But of all those who showed interest, Jeff Goldblum, Jay Leno, and then up-and-comer Robin Williams were in the top 3, and even made visits to the set. Ultimately, however, the part went to Robin Williams, who had risen to fame in the early 80s from the TV show Mork and Mindy. In fact, when puppeteer Tim Rose was on Saturday Morning Rewind with Tim Nidell, he told a fascinating story of Robin Williams' eventual departure.
So we're shooting the scene